A faint porcelain whisper brushes your ear. Did that antique doll just smile? The shadows deepen, shifting. You swear its button eyes just blinked, just followed you across the room. It's only decoration, you tell yourself. But then why does the cold insist on lingering? And why do you feel so utterly, undeniably watched? Elara Vance lived a life steeped in the hushed elegance of the past. Her hands, nimble and stained with wood polish and antique wax, were her livelihood and her solace. A restorer of antique furniture and forgotten curiosities, she spent her days coaxing beauty back from the brink of decay. She would meticulously piece together shattered porcelain or burnish the patina of forgotten heirlooms. Her home, a sprawling Victorian structure on the outskirts of Blackwood Creek, was less a residence and more a living museum. Each room was a testament to a bygone era. Dust motes danced in sunbeams that cut through tall leaded windows. They illuminated heavy velvet drapes and the rich gleam of polished mahogany. For years, Elara had considered herself immune to trends, finding her joy in the timeless. But then the dolls began to appear. Not in her home, not at first, but everywhere else. Social media feeds, lifestyle blogs, boutique antique shops, all were awash with images of reclaimed vintage dolls. They were artfully arranged as chic, melancholic decor. There was a burgeoning global fascination with these relics of childhood past. People found a unique aesthetic in their cracked faces, their faded dresses, their unblinking glass eyes. They were quirky, they were conversation starters, and they carried a sense of history. Elara, despite her initial skepticism, found herself drawn in one rainy autumn afternoon. She was at a sprawling estate sale, a house being cleared out after its elderly occupant had passed. Amidst the usual assortment of tarnished silver and moth-eaten tapestries, tucked away in a dusty alcove, sat a doll. It was a porcelain figure, perhaps French, from the late 19th century. Her name, a faint inscription on her neck, read Isolde. Her face, though delicate, bore a network of hairline cracks like an ancient map of sorrow. Her wide, cobalt blue eyes seemed to hold an impossible depth, a world of untold stories. Her elaborate Victorian dress, once pristine cream lace, was now a faded écru. It hinted at years of gentle neglect. "She's seen things, hasn't she?" Elara murmured, tracing a cracked cheekbone. There was a profound stillness about Isolde. An unsettling wisdom was in her gaze. It wasn't the sweet, innocent look of a child's plaything. It was the intense, knowing stare of something far older. Elara bought her not for decoration, she told herself. It was a potential restoration project, a challenge for her skilled hands. Isolde took up residence in Elara's sun-drenched sitting room. She was perched regally in a high-backed velvet armchair that had once belonged to Elara's grandmother. Elara intended to restore her, but each time she approached with her tools, a strange reluctance held her back. The doll, in her current state, seemed perfect. To mend the cracks would be to erase the history etched upon her. So Isolde remained, a silent, elegant observer. Days turned into weeks. Elara continued her work, her life a comfortable rhythm of sanding, painting, and researching historical pieces. Yet Isolde's presence began to subtly alter the atmosphere of the room. Elara would catch herself glancing at the doll, feeling an odd pressure as if she were being watched. She'd dismiss it as fanciful. It was the natural consequence of having such an arresting object in her peripheral vision. Then came the first creaks. Her house was old, naturally prone to groans and whispers, but these were different. They seemed to originate from the sitting room, often just after Elara had left it. A soft, deliberate click or a faint rustle, like fabric shifting. She'd investigate, find nothing amiss, and blame the wind or the settling timbers. Online, the doll craze was reaching a fever pitch. Forums dedicated to antique doll enthusiasts buzzed with activity. People shared photos of their prized possessions, exchanging tips on care and display. Amidst the general cheer, Elara started noticing a new, creeping thread of conversation. Users would jokingly comment on their dolls watching them or following them with their eyes. A few more serious posts emerged. They described dolls found in different positions than left, or objects near them mysteriously disturbed. These were largely met with humor or attributed to poor memory, pets, or drafts. "It's just the creepy vibe of old dolls. Relax," was a common refrain. Elara, a pragmatic woman, nodded along. It was probably just the vibe. But then Isolde's head was turned. Elara was certain. She had left the doll facing directly into the room towards the empty fireplace. When she returned from her workshop later that evening, Isolde's head was subtly tilted. Her gaze was now fixed on the doorway leading to the hall. It was a small shift, easily missed. Elara frowned, walked over, and gently repositioned the doll's head. "Silly me," she muttered. "I must have left it like that." But she knew, deep down, she hadn't. The following morning, a similar incident. One of Isolde's small porcelain hands, which Elara remembered resting delicately in her lap, was now hanging limp by her side. This time, Elara felt a prickle of unease. She adjusted the hand, her fingers brushing the doll's cold porcelain. The sensation was oddly jarring. It was like touching something that should be warm, but was instead utterly, chillingly cold. She told herself she was simply becoming more observant, imagining things. Old houses played tricks on the mind. Loneliness played tricks on the mind. She acquired another doll a few weeks later. A small, unassuming rag doll with faded button eyes and a crudely stitched smile. She found it at a charity shop, almost hidden under a pile of discarded linen. It had a melancholic charm, a stark contrast to Isolde's refined elegance. She named him Barnaby. She placed him on a small bookshelf in her study, facing away from her desk. He was a benign presence. Barnaby, however, seemed to have an affinity for movement. Or perhaps Elara's memory was truly failing. She would distinctly recall leaving him on the top shelf, only to find him slumped against a stack of books on the bottom shelf later that day. Or once, draped over the back of her desk chair. His button eyes were seemingly boring into her as she sat down. Each time, Elara would reposition him. A faint tremor of irritation and something else, a nascent fear, was beginning to take root within her. Her sleep began to suffer. She would wake with a start in the dead of night, her heart hammering. A profound sense of being watched enveloped her. She'd lie there, rigid, listening to the creaks of the house, the whisper of the wind, and in the silence, a phantom echo of rustling fabric. Sometimes she swore she heard a faint, high-pitched giggle like a child's, but it was always gone before she could fully grasp it. Nightmares plagued her. Dreams of static faces, of wide, blank eyes. Dreams of being trapped in a room filled with countless dolls, all silently observing her. Their expressions were subtly changing, morphing into malevolent grimaces. She tried to rationalize it. Stress, too much coffee, the isolated nature of her work. She even tried leaving a small nightlight on in the sitting room. When she checked it in the morning, Isolde's head was always subtly, irrevocably turned towards her bedroom door. The nightlight provided no comfort. It only cast long, dancing shadows that made the dolls seem more animated. The online forums, meanwhile, were no longer joking. The tone had shifted. More and more users reported not just movements, but increasingly specific, unnerving incidents. A doll's porcelain hand found gripping a kitchen knife. A doll's eyes, unmistakably, glowing in the dark. A user named Silas Collector posted a chilling account. His antique clown doll was whispering his deceased mother's name. It was a name he had never spoken aloud in its presence. The thread was filled with a mixture of terrified disbelief and genuine concern. Some urged people to get rid of the dolls. Others, though, reported that attempts to discard them were futile. The dolls would reappear, sometimes in even more sinister positions. Elara decided to test this. One afternoon, consumed by a growing dread, she gathered Isolde and Barnaby. She also gathered a few smaller, decorative bisque dolls she'd acquired. With a trembling hand, she placed them all into a sturdy cardboard box. She taped it shut with industrial-strength tape and carried it up to her dusty attic. She placed the box in the darkest corner under a pile of old blankets. Then she secured the attic door with a heavy bolt. There, she thought, out of sight, out of mind. She slept soundly that night. It was the first truly peaceful sleep in weeks. A sense of relief washed over her, a fragile calm. She awoke with a lightness she hadn't realized she'd lost. She went about her morning routine, humming a cheerful tune. As she descended the grand staircase towards the kitchen, she glanced towards the sitting room. Isolde sat in her velvet armchair. Her head was perfectly aligned, her gaze fixed on Elara. Barnaby was perched on the mantelpiece, his button eyes seemingly twinkling in the morning light. The smaller bisque dolls were arranged meticulously on the coffee table, a silent, unblinking chorus. Elara froze, a scream catching in her throat. Her blood ran cold, turning her limbs to ice. She backed away slowly, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. How? How was it possible? She rushed to the attic, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The bolt was still secured. She fumbled with it, her fingers clumsy with fear, finally pulling it back. 6. She burst into the attic, her gaze darting to the corner. The cardboard box sat there exactly as she had left it. It was taped shut under the blankets, but the box was empty. The blankets were undisturbed. There was no sign of forced entry, no indication that anyone had touched it. The dolls had simply left. That was the turning point. The quiet, dismissible unease shattered. It was replaced by a cold, hard certainty. The dolls were not merely objects. They were active. They were aware. And they were in her home, with her. Elara's life became a waking nightmare. The whispers started subtly, a faint, breathy sound just beyond the edge of hearing. Elara, lonely Elara, it would sigh. It seemed to come from the sitting room, from the study, from anywhere the dolls were. Sometimes it sounded like a child's voice, sometimes an ancient, crackling murmur. It was never quite clear, always just enough to make her question her own sanity. The movements became less discreet. She would see Isolde's head snap to follow her as she walked past the sitting room door. She would hear the distinct sound of a doll's stiff dress rustling in the dead of night. It was not from a draft, but from a deliberate, unseen movement. Objects around the dolls were no longer merely disturbed. They were actively manipulated. Her favorite thimble, which she had meticulously placed in its sewing box, would reappear nestled in Isolde's lap. A delicate antique locket, a family heirloom, was once found hanging around Barnaby's neck. Her health deteriorated rapidly. Sleep was a luxury she could no longer afford. Every night, she would drift into a restless doze only to be jolted awake. The chilling sensation of cold porcelain touching her cheek, or the feeling of tiny, unyielding fingers gripping her ankle. She would open her eyes to find Isolde or Barnaby, or a cluster of the smaller dolls arranged around her bed. Their unblinking eyes were fixed on her. Their expressions seemed to have subtly changed. Isolde's hairline cracks now resembled a cruel, mocking smile. Barnaby's stitched mouth seemed stretched into an impossible, malevolent grin. The lights in her house began to flicker erratically. This happened especially when Elara felt a surge of fear or anger. Often, they would extinguish completely, plunging her into utter darkness. The only light was the faint, unsettling glint from the doll's eyes. Small objects would fall from shelves with no apparent cause. They were always landing near one of the dolls. One evening, a heavy book of Victorian poetry, which had been securely shelved, hurtled across the room. It struck the wall just inches from Elara's head. Its pages fluttered open to a specific poem about lost children, a chilling coincidence. Elara tried to fight back. In a fit of desperate rage, she seized one of the smaller bisque dolls. It was a cherubic figure that now seemed to sneer at her. She tried to smash it, but the doll felt impossibly dense, its porcelain skin resistant to her blows. It felt as if she were hitting stone. When she finally threw it against the wall with all her might, it bounced harmlessly off the plaster. It landed upright, its eyes still fixed on her. Its delicate painted smile was mocking her efforts. She could swear she heard a faint, tinkling laughter from Isolde's direction. She began to research in earnest, desperately trying to find an explanation, a solution. She scoured ancient texts, obscure folkloric journals, and forgotten local histories. She discovered tales of spirit dolls, or vessel dolls. These were objects crafted not just for play, but to house the spirits of the deceased, particularly children who died tragically or violently. These dolls were sometimes used in spiritualist practices to communicate with the dead, or as mementos to keep a loved one's presence near. Over time, in the wrong hands or left in despair, these spiritual anchors could become corrupted. The benevolent spirits would twist into something possessive, malevolent, and demanding. The sheer number of these dolls being collected now, she realized with a sickening lurch, was not a coincidence. It was a catalyst. The widespread craze for antique dolls had created a critical mass, a collective awakening. Each purchase, each display, had inadvertently provided new vessels, new energy sources for these dormant entities to draw from. The veil between worlds, already thin, was being torn asunder by the sheer volume of human desire for these objects. Elara reached out to Dr. Eris Thorne, a reclusive academic she'd found mentioned in a dusty journal. He was a folklorist and historian specializing in forgotten cultural practices. He studied the spiritual significance of mundane objects. Initially, Dr. Thorne was skeptical, attributing the online reports to mass hysteria and the power of suggestion. But Elara's detailed, increasingly frantic accounts, coupled with the alarming consistency of similar reports across the globe, slowly wore down his academic detachment. He agreed to meet her. When Dr. Thorne finally arrived at Elara's house, he found a woman on the precipice of a breakdown. Elara's once vibrant eyes were now hollow, haunted pools. Her hands trembled constantly, and her normally meticulous hair was disheveled. The house itself felt different. A palpable chill permeated the air, even on a warm afternoon. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence oppressive. Dr. Thorne, despite himself, felt a shiver trace his spine as he entered the sitting room. Isolde sat in her armchair, her gaze unwavering. Barnaby seemed to leer from the mantelpiece. "They are unnerving," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Elara explained everything, her voice often cracking with fear. She showed him the scratches on her arms, the unearthly chill in certain rooms. She showed him the evidence of the doll's inexplicable movements. Dr. Thorne, initially searching for logical explanations, found none. The scientific, rational world offered no answers for what Elara described. He discovered accounts of the children of sorrow. This was a shadowy historical belief system. It suggested that objects intended to comfort grieving parents could become imbued with the child's unresolved sorrow and resentment. If left unmourned or treated merely as curiosities, these vessels could become incubators of malevolence. They sought to reclaim the life they were denied by feeding on the living. "It's not just the doll itself," Dr. Thorne explained, his voice hushed. "It's the essence trapped within it, warped by time and neglect. And now, with so many of these vessels being brought back into circulation, an unintended ritual has been performed. They are not merely interactive, Elara. They are awakening. He looked at Isolde, a newfound fear in his eyes. And they are hungry. Then came the news about Silas Collector. His last desperate post was chilling. They're not just watching. They're inside. They know your fears. They're coming for us all. Don't look at their eyes. After that, silence. His account simply went dark. A few days later, a brief news report mentioned a man found dead in his home, surrounded by an extensive collection of antique dolls. Cause of death was inconclusive. Elara's house became a fortress of fear. Dr. Thorne tried to help, suggesting rituals of cleansing and protective sigils. But the dolls seemed to mock their efforts. The whispers grew clearer, more malicious. They echoed her deepest fears and past regrets. Elara could no longer distinguish reality from hallucination. Her physical body began to betray her. She was constantly cold. She wasted away, her skin pale and translucent, her hair turning stark white in patches. Dr. Thorne tried to get her out, but she resisted, bound by a terrifying inertia. The dolls no longer merely interacted, they dominated. She found herself arranging elaborate tea parties for them. She was becoming their caretaker, their prisoner, a living puppet on their strings. One night, the full moon cast an eerie glow through the sitting room windows. "It is time, Elara," Isolde's voice filled the room. It was a chorus of voices, ancient and childlike. "Time to join us. Time to be one of us." Elara looked up, her hollow eyes wide.